AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. Brett Johnson with you here on a Tuesday afternoon. And as usual on Tuesdays, we are joined by the editor-in-chief of the Minnesota Reformer. That's Patrick Coolican over at minnesotareformer.com, as we are going to be talking about some of the stories they've been working on and some other items that have been in the news recently. And today, mainly two topics we're going to be focusing on, including this absolutely crazy deliberation that's happening with the Feeding Our Future trial, including a juror possibly, being attempted to be bribed. We'll also be talking about some controversy between Governor Tim Walz and Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty. Patrick, thanks so much for coming back on the show. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. So let's start off talking about Feeding Our Future, because a juror in that case was excused yesterday after prosecutors said an unidentified individual went to that juror's house on Sunday night and offered a bag of cash containing about $120,000 if this juror voted for acquittal. Assistant U.S. Attorney Joseph Thompson said in an open court document that a woman in a Mazda drove to the juror's home in Spring Lake Park, left the bag of cash at her father-in-law, and said there will be another bag tomorrow if she voted to acquit the 7 defendants. The juror rightfully called 911 immediately after, and the FBI came to retrieve the money. The remaining jurors have all been questioned by the judge whether they had been contacted in a similar matter, and none said they had. But, boy, Patrick, this is something that seems like it's coming straight out of like a legal or a spy thriller. I mean, this is something I've not heard of happening very often, at least in real life. What's your reaction to this just crazy story getting even weirder with Feeding Our Future in this trial?
Yeah, our reporter, Dina Winter, who's been at the trial most days for several weeks, and I'll tell you, when she told me she wanted to be there most days, I was not entirely supportive because I just didn't want her to miss out on other stories while she was at the courthouse. But she was obviously right and made the right decision because it's been really a fascinating trial, and that was before Monday morning. She actually texted me on very early Monday morning, told me that she'd received a text from a courthouse source who said, "Get here, you're not going to believe it." And sure enough, a jury, the youngest member of the jury, 23 years old, the only person of color, we believe, on the jury, was approached Sunday night, not home, but her father-in-law took this package, and then, as you noted, she immediately called 911 when she got home. The judge yesterday said in court that the juror is quite terrified. I think if somebody shows up at your house with a bag of money and tells you, we'll give you more money if you do this, it's not just a promise, it's also this kind of a threat. So that juror has been removed. They also were forced at that point to seize everyone's cell phones after a search warrant was issued for them, the defendants, I should say, the 7 defendants. Then they had to have a detention hearing to determine whether or not they would detain the defendants who had been free, whether or not they needed to detain them because they are now suspects in this bribery case. Some of the arguments made in court by the prosecutor and apparently accepted by the judge were that the only people who knew the identities of the jurors were the prosecutors, the defendants, and the defendants' lawyers. And so therefore, it made sense to detain the defendants as part of this new bribery case. As Dina, our reporter, pointed out this morning in our Minnesota Reformer newsletter, that's probably not accurate to say that the defendants on trial and their lawyers and the prosecutors are the only ones who know the identities of the jurors, because given the way technology is today, it's not really that difficult to determine somebody's identity if you can get a picture of them often, or they were not sequestered during the trial, so you could follow them home. There's all kinds of ways that you could find out the identity of a juror, and once you know the identity of a juror, you get their address pretty easily, or vice versa. If you were to follow them home, you got their address, you probably get their identity. So to me, I think there's a much wider pool of possible suspects in the bribery case. And mind you, I'm not an investigator, but I think just common sense would tell us that it's not just these defendants, because remember, there's 63 other defendants in this case so far. A number of them have already pleaded guilty. One has left the country. But you've got a lot of people who are waiting for trial, and they have a lot on the line here, because I think if there's going to be convictions in this case, you're likely to see a lot more cooperation going forward from defendants and other suspects, because other people could be indicted. It was a $250 million scheme. The current defendants are only accused, I think, of taking or misusing $49 million. So there's other defendants, there's other suspects, there's pretty high-profile people. We know that, for instance, a Minneapolis City Councilman's wife was involved in the feeding her in the meals program. So she's not been charged. There's prominent people who have a lot on the line with this verdict, not because they themselves are on trial, but because if a guilty conviction comes down on these 7 defendants, or for preponderance of them, it doesn't look good for future defendants, if that makes sense.
Well, and to your point as well, I think you brought up a great aspect that, while it could be someone in the courtroom, that's not necessarily the case, just because of the technology that you said's out there, where it could very easily be someone that wasn't in the courtroom. Are authorities broadening their investigation in terms of who made it, and to maybe someone who was outside the court? Because obviously, if you're the prosecutor, the judge in this case, you got to figure out who is the person that's attempting to bribe these jurors, because, well, you could essentially have a mistrial or something that completely throw a big wrench in this, which I'm sure is kind of what the defense wants, which would be a mistrial. But any ideas on who exactly they're looking for in terms of who could be trying to make these payments to the jurors?
Well, I have a strong sense that they are really going to investigate this really forcefully and aggressively and quickly, because it really just strikes at the heart of the justice system. I have a contact in federal law enforcement in another state that I sent this to, and his response was just, period, my period, God, period. I mean, it's just so crazy, and the kind of behavior that undermines the entire legal system. And so I think they're going to take this very seriously, and it doesn't sound like the person who delivered the bag of money was super careful. They had a conversation at the door with the juror's father-in-law. We have a description of the person. We have a description of the car. We know it's a Mazda. If the juror's address had a Ring doorbell or any kind of surveillance, if a neighbor did, if anybody caught a license plate, this thing will get rolled up pretty quickly. They now have seized the phones of the defendants. The lead prosecutor in the case, noticed that as soon as he announced this in open court, one of the defendants started quickly typing away on his phone. That doesn't mean he's guilty, but certainly interesting behavior. And so now they seized the phones. They got the search warrant. They're going to be looking at all kinds of the correspondence that was happening on those defendants' cell phones. So I'd be very surprised if this became a cold case.
You can read more about Dina's great reporting on this over at MinnesotaReformer.com. That's MinnesotaReformer.com. And one final story briefly want to touch on about has to do with Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty and DFL Governor Tim Walz, because Mary Moriarty attacked Governor Walz on Monday, accusing him of meddling in her prosecution of State Patrol Officer Ryan Lundgren, who shot and killed Ricky Cobb during a traffic stop on I-94 in Minneapolis last summer. She says it's because, quote, "I'm a queer woman in this role," unquote. So before we get into this, into the dispute between Walz and Mary Moriarty, I'm just curious, what power would Governor Walz have to reassign this case? Because as I understand it, this was kind of the threat that was hanging over the head of Mary Moriarty, is that she might be removed from this case. She ultimately did decide to remove herself for the case, but ultimately the governor does have the power to do this at the county level, it sounds like.
Yeah, he can take a case, and he's done that before in the past, and so I think there's there was already a bit of tension there. If you remember, there was a juvenile case that Moriarty came to a plea agreement. The family of the victim thought it was too lenient. The case went, the governor took it and gave it to Attorney General Keith Ellison. So he certainly has that power. And according to State Trooper Lonergan's attorney, on Tuesday he was approached by the governor's counsel, and they asked about a change of prosecutor, which I don't know. I found that a little unusual. But in any case, Moriarty says that none of that, which she called credible rumors of her being removed from the case, had anything to do with her decision to drop the charges. She says she dropped the charges because Lonergan, state patrol trainer, provided a declaration stating that he never trained Lonergan to refrain from physically extracting people from a running car, which is what set the whole events in motion last summer. So, there was going to be that evidence that he was acting according to his training, and then also that he felt that his partner on the other side of the car was in danger because Ricky Cobb was reaching for his gun. And so Moriarty says, well, that was new evidence, and that the body camera footage could not prove or disprove, but in any case, it would be a problem in court if he were to testify that he thought his partner's life was in danger because Ricky Cobb was reaching for his gun, and that's why he shot. So she dropped the charges. But it wasn't enough for her to just drop the charges. She went on quite a little media tour that started on Sunday night and continued into Monday, and she certainly hit Walz hard and claimed that Walz was kind of following the political winds on his decisions rather than what is proper legally and from a criminal justice standpoint. And I think that's a fair criticism to make. But then she also said that the reason that Walz's hostility was related to the fact that she's a queer woman. And this kind of brought a lot of blowback. Tim Walz was a founder of, when he was a teacher at West Mankato High School, of a gay-straight alliance group. He was, I think, the first advisor along with Glenn Walz. I talked to, when he was running for governor the first time, I talked to students there who said they were just such a great steadying presence for gay students. He ran on gay marriage in his first run for Congress in 2006, which people don't realize it now maybe, but that was a big deal at the time. I mean, George W. Bush had been reelected, some thought on the strength of his anti-gay marriage message in certain states. So here's Walz running in the first district in Minnesota. I think generally we'd associate it with fairly conservative cultural values. He's running on marriage equality in 2006 and wins on it, and certainly been viewed by LGBTQ folks as an ally, and he got statements of support to that effect, including from Angie Craig, who's I think the first open lesbian mom in Congress and the first openly lesbian member of Congress from Minnesota, et cetera. So I think that was probably I mean, maybe she feels that way, and she gets a lot of support from the fact she just says what she feels. But I think that was probably a statement that she would have been better off keeping to herself, just because he does have a lot of credibility on the issue and a lot of supporters.
Yeah, he is the governor of Minnesota, and as I've at least seen so far, it seems like the vast majority, if not all, of the kind of DFL party apparatus has largely been lining up behind Governor Tim Walz in this case. You can read more about that over at MinnesotaReformer.com, MinnesotaReformer.com, as well as the other great stories that they have been working on. We are just about out of time for today, but we have been speaking with Patrick Coolican, who is the editor-in-chief of the Minnesota Reformer. Patrick, as always, thanks for coming on the show today.
Always a pleasure.
All right, let's take a break and send things back over to Matt McNeil on AM 950.